too, so been around machinery for years and it screwed my ears up, so I can feel for those that don't hear very well. So if this helps any, it might look silly, but sometimes it helps. Okay, we're kind of a fill-in, kind of a tag team thing today.
You may have noticed Julie Bushmaker is not here. She was on the schedule originally, so here we are.
Yeah, so
Congratulations. Hopefully we'll do.
Lindsay and I have worked together on a couple of different projects. We kind of helped teach an adult ed class at Butte High for a while. We did some spooks and spirit things, and we did some things in conjunction with other historical things that kind of play into what we're doing. So when Tyler asked us if we'd fill in here to do this for Julie, we said, sure, we'll do that. But we didn't really have a topic or anything, and they said, well, let's do something about the streets in Butte. So for me, that was kind of a natural, being with the road department for, many years in public works. I got a pretty good feel for streets, roads, alleys in Butte, so that's kind of what we're going to talk about. And Lindsay's really good at research, and a lot of things we needed to get the right information on, because it's pretty easy to make up stuff in Butte if you don't know what it is. And that happens a lot. So we try not to do that here. We try and make it real and actual and factual. Well, my other partner, Chris Fisk, usually takes it the other direction. So we try and make it as accurate and as factual as we can. So with that, today we're going to talk about roads, streets, and alleys from aluminum to zinc. That's A to Z, right? We're going to cover everything, and we're going to do it with a Butte perspective. So, welcome to Butte. Okay. So,
Oh, sorry. I got excited. Sorry.
Running me on. Yeah. This is one of my favorites. Everybody knows where this was taken from, right? The Big N, right? Yeah, Big N. Butte City. Timber Butte, Big Butte. Yeah, of course. So this is Butte. This is the hill. This is the flat, right? Everybody knew that, right? Do we have anybody here that's not from Butte? Oh, great.
Let's say, you don't necessarily have to be from Butte to know Butte. Let's say recent to Butte, like last couple of years.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah,
love that you're here.
Yeah, Butte folks tend to think everybody's been here and they're from here, so we take a lot for granted. So when we talk about the hill and the flat all the time, we figure you know what that is, the hill and the flat. But if you just come to Butte, you realize there's a hill and there's a flat. So for those that live here, it's real natural, but for those that don't, that differentiation is kind of different. But anyway, this is the hill and this is the flat. This is the Big M, named Butte because of the buttes that were in town, the French word for like big heavy duty mound or a hill. So we had Big Butte and Timber Butte. And of course, you got other topography around here that's pretty similar. Anyway.
Still not yet?
This is Butte.
Yeah, oh, okay.
So Butte's the center of everything, right?
Yeah, clearly.
So, we've got to know our cardinal directions, right? North, south, east, and west. In Butte, it's pretty easy to figure that out, right? Big Butte, East Ridge, Timber Butte, Red Mountain, East Peak, Table Mountain. They're called the Highlands. Everybody should know that, south of town, okay? Then we move on to Walkerville, north. Actually, this is north. Big Butte would be my northwest rather than north. Well, if you ask kids in town where north is, they always point to the end and say that's north. But north is actually more like Walkerville. Okay? So the major attractions in town, the courthouse, everybody knows where that is, right? Civic Center, everybody pretty much knows where that is. Burt Mooney Airport, okay? So we're on the hill, center of town, way out on the flats, okay? Pretty good. Silver Bow Creek, everybody knows that one, right? Blacktail Creek, right? Okay. So, I like a lot of geography too, and demographics and stuff. I'm a real nerd with all this stuff. So, anyway, this water's got to flow, right? Flows from north, southwest. This flows from south, northwest. Meets at this junction here, this confluence, right down by just south of Front Street there on George Street and Montana Street. That's where they join. Right, everybody knew that, right? Okay. Okay. Elevations, that's part of that topography again. Big M's at 6,375 feet, sea level, elevation sea level. Walkerville's higher at 6,463. Going in, oh yeah, excuse me, Timber Butte, 6,175. It seems like it should be a little bit higher, but that's, these numbers vary from different sources. You think that would be a pretty accurate number, but different places have different numbers, but these seem to be the best that I could come up with. East Ridge, pretty high at 8510, that's where the Lady of the Rockies is. The three mountains, the three peaks in the Highlands, East Peak, Table Mountain, and Red Mountain. To me, Red Mountain looks like it's the highest. It's the one furthest west. The Table Mountain is actually higher, and that's a Forest Service number. And Table Mountain is higher. So anyway, all this water flows down towards the center of town. Okay. Courthouse, that little pinnacle on the top of that little pillar in the front of the courthouse has an elevation marker at 5755. The airport's at 5550. So we're really in the bowl here. This is higher than here, and this is higher than here. So this flows this way. There's always that urban legend in Butte that the courthouse stairs and the Burnley Airport are on the same elevation. They're not. This way, no. And the Civic Center is kind of like a lower point in between. So water runs this way, and water runs this way, and water runs this way towards Metro sewers. They call this Metro sewer storm drain. Actually, Silver Bowl Creek. But that's the lowest point in this portion of the city at 5412. So naturally, that's the low point for all this to flow. Okay. So that's enough for the geography lesson. We'll get back into roads, streets, and alleys. The basis for this talk today, we're going to talk about roads, and they basically refers to a path or a route that's often built between or within cities or towns for easy transportation. This comes from the National League of Cities and Towns. This is their definition of these. Street refers to a pathway for the public that's usually constructed with houses on either side. Streets are generally found in towns and localities and cities. Alleys can be a narrow street, especially in the thoroughfare through the middle of a block, giving access to the rear or lots of the buildings. Yeah, pretty basic. Okay. Okay, is this one yours? No, it is this one, yeah. Okay, the main rules for naming streets that the addresses should be clear, unambiguous, and logical. Picture that in Butte, yeah. New street names should be different to anything already in use in the area, and it should not be difficult to pronounce or awkward to spell. So we got Western, we like Western, so we got Western Street and Western Avenue, and we got Phillips Street and Phillips Avenue. And at one time we had two Utahs. Utah that we have presently, and the first Utah was actually where Hamilton Street is. That used to be Utah between Granite and Broadway. And when South Butte developed with the onset of the railroads, they wanted to name that street next to Arizona coming uptown Utah. So the South Butte folks named that Utah, and in response, the city changed Utah to Hamilton, which was named after the Hamilton block, which is where Harrington's Cafe is. So Utah became Hamilton. So talking about those names that either are hard to pronounce or spelled wrong all the time. Lewishon's a good one. It's usually S-H-O-N. I've even seen street signs that said S-H-O-N. But it's S-O-H-N, just like John, J-O-H-N. Porphyry, that's always a good one. I remember my dad used to tell me a story about the police had an accident down on Excelsior and Porphyry. And they couldn't spell Porphyry, so they said, just move it down the block and do it on gold. Anyway, crazy thing, that's silly things that you remember. Keokuk's alwa's a good one, and one of my favorites is Gagnon? Yeah, it's Gagnon, yeah. In Butte, we do both, yeah. So where possible, they should try to reflect the history, heritage, or geography of the local area. So Civic Center Road, Olympic Way, Anaconda Road, they're pretty significant. They've got some heritage with them historically. And all the street names should end with the following suffixes: street, road, way, avenue, drive, place, grove, mead, vale, meadow, rise, crescent, close, court, square, whatever.
Sorry.
You get the Thanks, Liz. Street names that could be seen as advertising or are offensive will be rejected. So these could be, in that realm there, Mining Museum Road, Nylick Lane. Anybody hear of Nylick Lane? You know why they call that Nylick Lane?
New York license.
New York Life. So who do you think put that in there?
Art Cody.
Art Cody, yeah. He also has a street in that subdivision, or that little addition, called Pamela. It was named for his daughter Pam, who died in a car wreck in Missoula when she was a freshman at the university. So, anyway, Santa Claus Lane is another one. Could be a religious thing, could be a problem, but we didn't seem to have a problem with it, and it stayed. So, where a rural is in two parts, the use of north, south, east, and west in the street name should be avoided. We don't really have this problem. So if you got a North Road east and a North Road west, could be an issue. So, we kind of stayed away from that one. And phonetically similar names within a postal town should be avoided. Kind of like Irwin and Irvin and George and Georgia. Yeah, we've got both of those. Historic street naming and numbering practices have meant some streets close to each other are the same name but a different suffix. Blacktail Lane, Blacktail Loop, Blacktail Canyon, all big. Little Basin, Basin Creek. We got several of those that fit in that category. This one, my favorite picture. This is early development, 1870s. This was Broadway Street. Okay. This was Main Street. This would be Court Street. So 1876. Anybody know what that white building would have been? Well, a barber shop, a bar, a post office, and hotel. Hotel de Mineral. This white building there. That was our first building. It was on the corner of Broadway and Main. It later torn down. The Clark brothers had a bank here. Anyway, that was Hotel de Mineral. That's where they decided that this would be close to the center of town.
Is that where McCarthy Palace is?
No, this is a block up. This is on Broadway.
Oh, Broadway.
Right.
Is D.A. Davidson, Jim?
What?
D.A. Davidson's location now?
D.A. Davidson, yeah. It's Prudential Bank, the big white building that looks out of place in an old town. Looked nice in '64. We're really on a progressive upswing then. Central Business District. It's taken off a Sanborn map. If you guys ever deal with Sanborn maps, these are really good for like history stuff. These Sanborn maps pretty much detail all these different areas in town. But these fellows, Lynn McFarland, Charlie Warren, and Orville O'Bannon, these guys got together and developed the streets and the street naming system for Butte. McFarland was a surveyor, Charlie Warren was a pretty active citizen in the community, and Orville O'Bannon was a probate judge. So they had a lot of juice and they had a lot of thought, and they put together the first plans for streets in Butte. The east-west streets in Butte would be named after minerals and elements. We all knew that, right? And the north-south streets were going to be named after, at first they said we'll name them after the presidents, but they had quite a bit of discussion about this, and they decided they'd name it after the streets after nearby states and territories. So that's what they did, and they decided that Broadway, Main, and Park Streets would remain as they were. Okay, and this happened in July 1876, and this 183-acre section of town would be known as the Butte Town Site and the Central Business District. So that's where that came from. So, Park and Main Streets would be the center of everything for Butte. All the street designations in Butte would come from there. All the distances would come from there. So this was gonna be our center point for the growth of the community. And these guys devised that, and that's where they set the standard for all this street naming would come from. So. This is pretty cool. For those chemists in here, these names are from the periodic table. Doesn't include some of the good ones that we've got in town. These other ones that are in here. Agate, crystal, diamond, emerald, galena, granite, lava, onyx, pearl, porphyry, quartz, ruby, steel, and topaz. You notice these ones in green. Any idea where those streets would be located?
No?
Dublin Gulch. In the county, they never ever did have street name signs. And
You were to get a
interesting,
piece of mail there, Jim.
interesting
What
enough,
did you say?
the mailman that delivered there, everybody that lived in the Gulch had an address at Summit Street. So you and your neighbor all had the same Summit Street, but the road just kind of looped around up in there. So they didn't need these names because everybody lived on Summit Street. So, anyway, another one that I thought was significant, when Steel Street first originated, it was named Steel, S-T-E-E-L, after the mineral. And
We'll talk about more later.
let's talk about that
Okay.
right now.
Not yet. Not yet.
In a minute.
Just getting excited.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We got the east and west, we got the minerals. So then we got north and south, and we got all these state names. We got quite a few of them. These we don't have. Arkansas, Connecticut, Hawaii, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Mississippi, Nebraska, and then the news, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York. We have a Carolina, but it's just Carolina. It's not north or south, it's all on the flat. And then Rhode Island, Tennessee, and Vermont. So, Park and Main Heads is my favorite spot. This is where it is. This is where all the action starts and our street naming begins, okay? 4 Mile. 4 miles south of town. Even had a bar there. You live just 4 Mile? If you sat in that bus shelter out in front of Walmart, you'd be right by the 4 Mile bar. 5 Mile, that building's still there. 9 Mile Campground, junction of US, or Montana 2 and Roosevelt Drive, or Continental Drive. And the 18 Mile, anybody know the 18 Mile? Anybody know the bar that was there? Cactus Junction, yeah. Pretty cool spot. Somebody said they sold liquor to underage kids, right? 18 miles out of town? That can't happen here. Anyway, back to Park and Main again. If you were at Park and Main and you look southeast, looking right at the bank there, everything on the south side of the streets in Butte have an even number. South side of the street has an even number. East side of the street has an even number. Ooh.
Sorry.
East side of the street has an even number. So looking at this direction, picture this in your head, always look southeast, south, and east. Those streets are all even numbers. Okay? Makes sense, right? So if you turn and look in the opposite direction, northwest, everything on the north side of the street and the west side of the street, or the west side of the street, would be odd numbers. And that carries through the whole community. Pretty much. This is Butte. We always have exceptions. So, pretty much this is how it goes, but there are exceptions. Okay. Okay, so as Butte grows, we've got to know how this happens. So, you can take this.
Oh, okay. So Butte grows outward. First there's property ownership. You have to own the property. And then if you want to lay out streets and such, you would survey, design, and plat, and have an engineered addition. It would be approved by the local government, and then approved by the postal service, and then it was be amended as required for changes. So here's an example of an addition here, the Corona edition. And if you notice on the Corona edition, we have platinum, aluminum, in Steele, but Steele does not have an E at the end of it. So we're gonna go back to Jim when he was getting excited there telling stories. So Steele Street was actually Steele Street, but there was a fellow that lived there by the name of Chester Steele, and when he passed away, they would end up changing the name of that street, well, the spelling of the name of that street to Steele with an E at the end of it. Chester Steele is this fellow here. This is his buddy Jack Corrett. But Chester Steele was born in 1894 in Portland, Oregon to Charles and Flora. And they moved to Butte, and his dad was actually in the real estate business, oddly enough. But Chester started working for the Anaconda Company in 1916 in the geologic department, and he worked closely with Reno Sales. Some of you might recognize that name. He married Amy Conover, also in 1916, and they would go on to live at 1200 Steele Street, 1200 West Steele. Chester Steele would eventually die in 1959. When he passed away, he was the vice president of Western Operations for the Anaconda Company.
See,
And they would
doesn't
go
she
on-
do good research? Good stuff.
They would go on to
I
name-
can never remember all that.
To change the name of the street for him, and then you also might be familiar with Chester Steele Park, right? So then there's some other streets in town you might be familiar with, and a lot of them, we realized, are named after mining claims. And this is a mining claim map. I don't recall the year, Jim. 1906? Okay. And these are all the different mining claims here in Butte. And there's a color coding you can't really see here, but different colors meant it was owned by a different company. And then there's some individual ones, outliers here as well. But we decided to look into some of those. Excuse me. Specifically, Zerelda, Hornet, Waukesha, and Empire. If you notice here, Zerelda, Hornet, and Hornet, Empire, and Waukesha. All named after those mining claims in the area.
Excelsior was in there also.
Excelsior as well. So,
Cool.
kind of a fun one. So there was also, as we mentioned, real estate people. They would frequently come in, they would have an addition, and they would also name the streets here. And these are a few of the fellows that would name streets after themselves. Some of these, we couldn't find the first name for Fawcett, but Hopkins. We couldn't find the first name for Shields, but Shields were Farrell Shields, Continental Drive, right? Talbot, Mahoney, Parrott with 2 T's. He was actually a lawyer for the company that platted that land. Edward Kemper, George Casey. He built the Casey block on Hamilton and Granite. David Upton of Upton and Noyes, which is down here. John Noyes, J.E. Gaylord, Franklin Farrell, and Charles Warren, who Jim mentioned earlier was part of that original street naming planning. So they all have streets named after them. Here's a few fun ones. Just gonna grab my notes here. I don't want to mess up here. So you guys are familiar with the Floral Park area here in Butte? Do we have anybody that lives down there? Okay. I live down there, so I'm like, yeah, park people. So this one really excited me to do the research on this.
So in Butte, if it was Floral Park, they probably had trees.
They probably had trees. Actually, we did an Instagram, Facebook post, social media post, there we go, on that recently, and Floral Park started in the 1920s, the idea of decorating your outside decor, and they had like a contest. It was actually like a destination to go see, kind of like the Meterville display. So there you go, extra tidbit. Anyway, the people that founded this area were Susan and Edward Bolivar. They arrived in Butte in 1898, and he worked as a merchant, and then he eventually got into real estate, Bolivar and Brown Real Estate, in 1908. They founded the area of Floral Park. They did the platting, the surveying, all of that in 1913. They had, they laid out the streets and alleys, they put in water mains and a line of street lights at that time along Floral Boulevard. So they have Floral Park. This was their house. Bolivar's Swiss Chalet will be thrown open to the public. This house is right here today. It's beautiful. You guys might recognize it if you're cruising down Floral there. So here's Edward with his Floral Park. All these houses there. This was their office, and it's no longer there. It's now the Floral Park Baptist Church. is now in that location. So that's kind of a bummer, but that's all right. That's all right, we're fine with it. But I wanted to point out Edward Street was actually named by Susan for her husband Edward. So it was originally Edward Street, and then eventually it got an S tacked on it, as will happen. And then we thought we knew who Phillips and Goodwin were named for, but we decided we didn't. We're not comfortable.
We had a Philip Goodwin, and it really was a good story.
So we were
that
like, this is
we
it.
didn't know if it was real factual.
This is the guy, but we couldn't confirm it, so we're not
He
going
was
to
a
tell you
postmaster,
stories.
but we couldn't fit him into Floral Park, so
Yeah.
yeah, we didn't put him in.
So, Edward and Susan would go on to live the rest of their lives here in Butte, and they both died in 1955, only a couple months apart. So, yeah. Okay, so naming additions and streets, same deal, right? Here's another fun one. You guys are familiar with Country Club Golf Course, right? So this was that area here. And this area was founded by William McClintock White. And he was born in 1861 in Iowa. He came to Montana in 1889 and landed in Butte in 1891. He started a real estate business with his brother Luther. And they would go on and they would dam up this creek right here to create Lake Avoca, Lake Avocado. No, I'm just kidding.
I like Lake Avocado, that's pretty
it's easy
cool.
to remember. Lake Avoca. In 1895, and the reason they did that was they actually owned the Butte Ice Company, so they were harvesting that ice in the winter before we have refrigerators. And he would go on to marry Elizabeth Warren in San Francisco in 1912.
Oh, you mean Elizabeth Warren isn't named after the senator?
It is not named after the senator, Jim. You know? You'd think so. It is wild how many people ask us that. It is astonishing. Yeah, we named it from some senator back east. That's what we did. That makes sense. But that's okay. And this is where they would live together, and they would have one child, Wallace McClintock White Jr. So they married in 1912. They came back to Butte, and he promptly named a street after her at that time. And then some of the other streets, so we have White Boulevard and White Way, right? We're not supposed to do that, but here it is. Oh, there we go. And that was, of course, for their last name. McClintock, it's still here today, and it's named for Wallace McClintock White. And then here's Wallace, and then here's also, if I click one more time, Jim, will it still stay there? Oh yes, okay. There's also Luther, named for his brother. And then Lofter, we couldn't figure this one out.
Anybody
Jim found
remember
this
when that was listed on the street as Lofter? And it was changed because the residents just hated it? And I can see why.
Why
Tell
was
us
it?
about Lofter.
You tell them.
Anybody, you know, we had to look this up. We figured Lofter was a name because all these others have a name in here. We figured Lofter had to be a person that's affiliated with this somehow. We can find it anywhere. So if you look up the definition of lofter, anybody know what a lofter is? Does anybody golf?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody golf at all? Do you use a 9-iron? A 9-iron is a lofter, like a wedge, like a
They really
wedge.
loft it.
There's a
Quite
lofter and an iron and a mashie and a brassy. Or the clubs that they golfed with in those days, and Lofter was one of the names. So that's where Lofter Lane came from. And it got thrown out, and this is all Elizabeth Warren now.
There you go.
So there you go.
Not named for the senator. Now we know. So we thought this was pretty cool. I should go back, sorry, I already showed it. So as we mentioned, he owned the Butte Ice Company, and they harvested their ice in Lake Avoca. Jim and I started looking at this, and it says 600 South Main here. We thought, well, where is that exactly? So we looked it up, Google Maps, right? And it's right where the Town Pump Corporate is. And this building still stands. You can see the similarities. So we thought that was pretty cool. We wanted to share that with you.
Butte Ice at the town pump, so that would make that pretty cool.
There you go.
Moving on.
All right. So we have this photo here at the archives, and it's the Tidewater Investment Company, which Wallace McClintock White was part of. And you can see the lake here, but also right here is, yeah, it's losing light there. This is Elizabeth Warren. Can you show them here?
This be.
Yeah, you can, I mean, if you were to drive that today, you would still have that curve, right, as you're going through the country club golf course. And a couple slides ago, I showed you the house that the Whites lived in, and this is that house, you know, a couple years ago. They have added on a garage since, but that's it. So, they would sell their property here, their interests in the Tidewater Investment Company, Lake Avoca, in 1938, because what was invented? Refrigerators, there you go. So we didn't need to have that Butte Ice Company anymore. And it would become the Country Club Golf Course as we know it today. So, all right, Jim.
Okay, it's kind of listing of the presidents that they named the streets after here. We also have a few that were named similar to presidents, but they weren't named before these presidents were already here.
Sorry.
That's okay. Bush, Carter, Clinton, and Kennedy were here before these were ever president. So we already had them.
Do you think people could just tell the future? So they just rename?
I think they knew. And they figured that the Bushes should have an S in there, or a C in there.
Yeah.
And give them a better grade. I don't know.
Classy. All right.
Anyway. Moving on.
Moving on. Talk a little bit about areas named with presidents. We have Harding Way and Roosevelt Drive. These are kind of fun ways they came about with fun names. So Harding Way was originally known as Project 159 or 18 Mile Hill Road, right? You're heading out to the 18 mile, right, Jim? It was built by Heiselt Construction of Salt Lake City, and they considered quite a few names for this. Considered Daly Drive in honor of Marcus Daly, Davis Grade for A.J. Davis, Carroll's Causeway for Eugene Carroll, Ryan Road for John D. Ryan, Clark Way for Senator W.A. Clark, Durston Drive for J.H. Durston. Glad we didn't do that. He got one in Bozeman, so he's got it. And Via de Valera for Eamon de Valera. So that's kind of an interesting one. But they ultimately, clearly, decided to go with Harding Way in honor of President Harding, who had been to Butte recently when they decided to name this area. But this was fun. I read this in a newspaper article. Roosevelt Drive, you know, people are just like, oh, it's clearly named for one of the Roosevelts. It was named for Teddy Roosevelt, particularly because he was a Republican. It was named such because the board that named it was all Democrat, and they wanted to show their bipartisanship, and they still supported the Republicans, so they chose to name that road after Republican Teddy Roosevelt.
Don't you like that research? Isn't that good stuff? Yeah. Mine's pretty boring.
No.
That research is really good.
But here they are. So I love this photo. You see Butte in the background there, in the distance. But yeah. Oh, here we are.
Parkinade, it must be my turn. Yeah. Parkinade, we love Parkinade, right? Okay, so.
I'm sorry, I keep this
It's
cough.
okay.
I don't want to start.
Okay, I know where we're going here.
Okay. Ooh.
Okay, Main Parkinade. If you went north on Main Street, kind of cruise up the hill there and then make a couple bends and turns as you get up there. You get past the St. Lawrence Church, you get by the Lexington Mine. Main Street goes up and takes a right here. It continues up this way. Main Street goes to the right. Well, back in the day, this was a big gulch that was here, a big gully in here. And in the 50s, Walkerville, City of Butte, State of Montana, and Jimmy Shea was the mayor, got together and wanted to fill this area in here and build this connector street between Main and Daly. And they did that. They built that, they put in street lights, they put in some sewer down below, down towards Bennett. They repaved all this, put in guardrail, but it never had a name. You know, some call it referred to it as Hill City Road and Main Street Extension and North of Walkerville Route. It had several different names, but it never really had a name until just a couple of years ago. A friend of mine, Pat Reardon, you may know Pat Reardon, worked in GIS, the Government Informational Systems. And he was kind of like the cartographer that put all this mapping stuff in the computer, and you can make all these fancy maps. Well, anyway, he had a friend named Mulcahy that lived in Walkerville. And I was working at the time, and I come up to see Pat, and we talked about this, and I asked him what the name of this street was here, because Main Street's here. And I asked what that was. He said, it doesn't have a name. I said, well, that's kind of strange that it doesn't have a name. And he said, yeah, he's like, I'm going to name it, though. I'm going to name it after my buddy Mulcahy. And I'm going to call it Muldoon Street. I know, that's pretty crazy. So it just sat like that for a long time. And then all of a sudden, I drive by there. This has a street sign that says Muldoon Street. If you Google map this area, this is what you'll see. This is Muldoon Street now. Like it or not, it's got a name, and it's a pretty unique story. But if you ever try to find a record on how that got named or whatever, you'll never find it. But, so in Butte, we do use pretty unique stuff. So Butte's pretty exceptional. So that's another one of those items I really like. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Anyway, Park and Main again, right? Where we're going to start everything. So we did this one already here, Main Street, where it splits up into Davie Street. Well, if you go south from Park, Main Street splits a lot. Main Street splits at Platinum and turns into Maryland. It splits at just below Fremont, splits into Iowa. And just after 2nd Street, it splits into Missouri. But what's really neat, when it hits Front Street, it does some other crazy stuff. We'll do that in a minute. We're talking about some splitters. Arizona Street does the same. You get down Arizona Street, this could be confusing to others. You drive down Arizona and you hit the light there, and all of a sudden it turns into Utah, and Arizona's on your left. So Arizona turns into Utah, and for some it's confusing when you come up Utah from Front Street, and you come up by the Silver Homes, all of a sudden you're on Arizona Street, and you don't know where the switch was. It was at Platinum. So anyway, Florence does the same thing. If you drive on Florence north from the junction there of Massachusetts by Safeway, Florence goes north and it splits at Carolina, it splits at Florida, it splits at Texas, and it splits at Georgia. Wow. Really common. So you probably don't realize it, and you probably drive by there and you know these addresses where these people live all the time. Those are splits that are in there. We've also got some dead enders that are pretty neat. Kossuth Street was a different addition that was added to one that was up above it. So when they lined all that up in those additions, when these streets came south and they met Kossuth, Lafayette, Garfield, Stewart, Thornton, Adams all dead ended to Kossuth. And as they switched, some of them changed names, some of them just disappeared. So, you're talking about Main Street when you come down to Front Street, and I like this is always fun. When you come down Main Street, Main and Front, when you cross the street, that Main and Front turns into Caw. Caw goes south, Main goes north. That's pretty easy. But if you follow Lexington down, and you come down Lexington Avenue Bridge, right? If you go across the Lexington Avenue Bridge, you can follow that all the way out here to Row Road. But at the same time, Main Street jumps over the swamp, jumps down here, and Main Street continues. So there's people that live on South Main that people might think that they're lost in here. The Main Street is really there, and it's parallel to Lexington. You know, one time they were straight in line, and all of a sudden this takes over, and then this is parallel. Okay. Anyway, it's another one of my favorites. You drive up Montana Street and you get to Front Street. If you take a left, you're on Centennial, and if you take a right, you're on Front Street. That Lofter Lane again we were talking about, I love that Lofter Lane. So if you're on this here, this first portion to Whiteway and Blacktail would be considered Lofter Lane. And then if you drive Elizabeth Warren west, when you get to Harrison Avenue, it changes to Hemans. And Hemans, depending on who the speller was at the sign machine. It's either H-E-M-A-N-S or H-E-M-O-N-S. A-N-S is correct because it's named after Felicia Hemans, who is a poet. As a matter of fact, there's a bunch of streets west of there that are named after authors and poets. Tennyson, Burns, Milton, right? All in that section over there. And Hemans was one of those. So, anyway, this is a good one too. When we get into the flat, we talk about some different streets that change. You might be familiar with this one here. If you travel on Hancock and you go south, when you hit Burlington, right by the Hawthorne School, when you cross the street, you're on White Way. Wallace McClintock, White Way, White Boulevard, White Way. Yeah. And when you follow this street down here, when you get to the next major street down there, Elizabeth Warren, when you cross the street, you're on Blacktail Lane. Another switch-o, change-o. Yeah. This is another one of my favorites, another mystery for me. You drive over Burlington, going west, and you get over by Sheridan. You come over Burlington, you hit Sheridan. So Sheridan comes down and goes into North Lake, turns into North Lake, and Burlington turns into White Boulevard. Yeah. There's a three-way switch on that one. That's pretty good. Yeah, people get confused on that. So for doing this, and I do this all the time. I'm a road and street guy all the time anyway. So this is one of my favorite resources with this 1958 telephone map. The old telephone books used to have a really good map in them. But this shows a lot of things you won't find today. You know, this section of town here, McLean and Meaderville, you know, East Butte and the Parrot Flat, all those sections of town you don't find anymore. This map has all that, and it's really good. You know, it's before McGlone Heights, so it really shows a lot of detail on a lot of different things. So, you want to do this one?
Yep. So the idea of the drive was developed in 1948, and before it became the drives, it was known as the old circus grounds. So this is where you could go see the circus. They had a plan to build 175 homes, and there were 5 different types of buildings planned. So this was your first cookie cutter home, if you will. And every home, I thought this was great, every home was to boast an electric garbage disposal unit, be finished in chrome and gleaming white enamel. But, you know, the drives here today, north, of course, north, south, east, west, cross drive, and center drive. And this was the beginning, this was the first development that did not have alleyways. So, interesting. Anything you want to add, Jim?
Nope, that's very good.
Oh, there we go, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I guess there was. The mayor at the time, Tim Sullivan, lived at this corner house here. And he was pretty big part of that whole development. And this park that was here, when they first built that, he named this after their daughter who had passed away. Her name was Kitty Lou. So when they built this used to be Kitty Lou Park. And then after John Kennedy died, they had a naming ceremony. When they named the Kennedy School, they also named this Kennedy Park. There's another tidbit. So.
Oh, the streets in Williamsburg are Germanic. This is where the breweries were located, right? So we have Baden, Bavaria, Berlin, Dresden, Frankfurt, Leipzig, Munich, Nassau. I can't ever say that one. Why can't I do that one?
Nassau, I don't know.
Nassau, I want to say something different. Stuttgart and Vienna. So the Germanic. And they also named streets after breweries too. So the Centennial Brewery was located on Centennial Avenue. A little history about that area. So this was founded in 1876, right, the centennial of our country, by Leopold Schmidt and Henry Mueller. They started in a wooden building, and it did so well that they expanded to this 3-story structure that you see here. And their slogan was, 1 million glasses a day, someone must like it. So they sold their beer quite well. And they claim to be the largest brewery north of Sacramento and west of St. Paul, Minnesota. And they would close in 1918 with Prohibition. And it would go on actually to become it was owned by the Nevins Frank Company, who produced soda pop and such.
So anybody know where this Olympia Brewery would be?
Behind the Met,
Oh.
What street's there?
Olympia Street.
Olympia Street, all right.
For Olympia Brewing Company.
Very good, very good.
And this was established in 1899 by Henry Mueller and Louis Best, who, if you recognize Henry's name, he was actually part of Centennial. So they started another brewery, and they established this 1899. And they didn't last too long. They closed in 1911 when they merged with Centennial Brewing. So, but another street name.
Very good.
You're doing
You want me to do this?
Yeah.
Okay. I like this name, Northern Pacific Edition. Okay, this is pretty good. East side of town. These are the streets. Really significant about this, when they started this, the first three streets that they named up at the top here were Anaconda, Bluebird, and Calusa. ABC? Pretty cool. Then, Calusa, Dexter, Eagle, Fairmont, Gregson, Hecla, Irene, Josephine, Kossuth, they're all in alphabetical order. Pretty neat. So you get to Kossuth, and the next one should be St. Anne.
Clearly.
Now, it used to be Lawrence. And when they built the church at St. Anne, they changed that to St. Anne's. Well, I guess it was before that, because St. Anne's church was there, the old St. Anne. So, anyway, Lawrence was changed to St. Anne. Then it continues with Moulton, Eddy, Ottawa, and Princeton. And then from there on, these turned into college names, and the alphabetical order disappears. They're pretty significant. Everybody knew that, right? They're all in alphabetical order, right? Yeah, it's kind of crazy thing. And this is one of my favorite. This is really dear to my heart, McQueen. I never lived there, but I ran around with a lot of guys who lived in McQueen. This was the McQueen edition. And the top part of the McQueen edition has streets in it like Greendale, Hedge, Evergreen, Cork, and Hawthorne that were platted but were never developed. So on paper they're there, but they were never ever developed. And on the bottom end down here, from pear, hickory, redwood, ash, fir, cherry, and plum would be considered East Butte. There was kind of like a creek or a stream that kind of broke this area here just below maple and grape. And to the McQueeners, this was like the divider here between McQueen and East Butte, because it's separate. McQueen is not East Butte, and East Butte is not McQueen. And for those that live there, there's a difference. But anyway, if you go up like at Granite Mountain Mine and look down, you can see the remnants of McQueen. What you'll see is this here. And this is what's left of McQueen. And the streets that are left are Willow, maybe we'll click the next one. They're Willow, Hazel, Maple, Lafayette, and Garfield. So all this up in here is all, it's all buried. It's really deep. This is all buried. And this down in here is buried. So this is all that you see. That treatment plant is here, where this road comes over here, continues like on Spruce. And that treatment plant would be like right here. That Horseshoe Bend Water Treatment Plant. Yeah, so it's kind of sad. But these are the remnants. If you go to that area, you can see some of the foundations from some of those houses that are still there. Yeah. You can kind of see these houses. I wish I knew the people that lived there. I ID these. I've got them on paper who lived where and their addresses, but you know, it's kind of eerie to see that. I've been there many times. It's kind of eerie to walk through there. Okay. Anyway, you know, a lot of cities have streets named after trees. And for Butte, I can see why they didn't do it, because when they had so many spelters down here, tree growth was pretty limited. You know, we were lucky to get some pine trees, let alone any deciduous trees that had any kind of flowers at all, or leaves at all. But we did have all these trees that are here. And these ones in red are ones that were in McQueen and East Butte. So they're pretty significant. Butte had a lot of streets named after notables. You know, some of the newer ones, you might recognize a lot of those names. We had streets named after politicians. You know, Calhoun, Clay, Dewey, Clark, Franklin. And our legends, you know. Crying George Rooney, Fat Jack, Lemons, whose name was Elmer Johnson, Nickel Annie, Santa Claus, and Shoestring Annie. Yeah, they've all got a story. And a lot of these streets were named after war heroes, from the Civil War to up until the Spanish-American War. I know Hobson and Sampson and Evans and Schley were part of the Spanish-American War. Those are heroes there. When that development came in, that's around the time that those streets were named. This is a good one. Marcus Daly's Racetrack. This is the area that encompassed this racetrack area here in the Daily edition and the racetrack edition. This would be like Reynolds and Marcia. And this would be Banks and, yeah, almost up there. That's a pretty big area. Okay. We've also got streets that are named after letters, ABC. The first of the number 4 mile, 5 mile, 9 mile, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street. And Walkerville really liked that too, so they named their streets the same. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, and A and B. You know, they also got some others up there, like Transit and Blue Wing and Toboggan and a lot of others, but they kind of like some of the ones we had, so they just kind of borrowed them up there. So. Okay.
Oh, the Hanson Packing Development. So how many of you have been on Hanson Road? Right? So this was the Hanson Packing Development. This was owned and operated by Walter Hanson. Walter was born in 1877 in Denmark. He came to the US at age 11. He would end up going to Chicago and he worked in stockyards where he got his start working in this capacity. And then he came to Helena as a butcher, and then he established a meat market on East Park Street in Butte a couple years later, finally founding Hanson Packing in 1912. And they did a lot of revolutionary things. They took part in slaughtering meat to make soup for the Great Depression that they could can. They provided meat to armed forces during both World Wars, and they were the first place to can dog food in America.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty wild, right?
Remember the Vance dog food?
Walter Hanson was injured in an automobile accident in 1936 in Nevada, and the rest of his life is not well documented. I don't think he was highly involved with his company, but he ultimately died from a heart attack in California in 1947, where he was receiving treatment for his injuries he received in that car accident 11 years prior. But to give you an idea of where things are, this tower here is next to that building that everybody, once again, this is a frequent question we get here, is that a church? No, it is not a church, it's part of a packing plant, and then people are horrified. But I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about, that big stone building. So here's Hanson Road here, and here's Walter Hanson in a 4th of July parade. Does anybody know what this building is?
Central.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Very good. Very good.
So, yeah. Streets named after other cities.
Yeah, these are other cities that Butte has streets named after. Albany, Augusta, Chicago, Detroit, Hartford, Missoula, Sacramento, Springfield, St. Paul, and Trenton. We got streets named after authors. Browning, Bryant, Burns, Hemans that I told you about, Holmes, Longfellow, Lowell, Milton, Tennyson, Whitman, and the colleges that are after the alphabet streets. Amherst, Bayard, Cornell, like Cornell's like an alley. Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. Okay.
Oh,
This is one of
talk
my
about this
favorites.
one.
Oh, this is good. Heman Street, where it comes off of Harrison Avenue, turns into Hemans. And it's spelled different. Even on Google, they couldn't make up their mind whether they used an A or an O. They were confused too, I guess. This is a good one. The Irwin development is over by the Met, behind the Met. But if you jump across the creek in behind the old Montana Hardware, what do they call that? Food stamp thing down south of Casey Street, Delaware.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I
That's
don't
the
know
other end of Irvine, that's Irvine in there and Irwin over here. Yeah, supposed to be the same, but they're not. This is one of my favorites. Oxford Street, Orford Street. By the power company on South Montana Street before you get on the highway, the Smith. This is known as Oxford Street. Well, actually, it was Orford Street, O-R-F-O-R-D. There was an Orford smelting company that had property in here. They ran a little smelter in there, and it was named Orford. But it kind of got changed through the years, it became Oxford. This is another one of my favorites. The street here called Home Street. It's Nome Street. When it was dedicated, that plat was developed, it was Nome Street, N-O-M-E, like Nome, Alaska. But if you look at it on the map, you can see it on this map over here. If you see where Nome Street is on the drawing, or on the printing, the N looks like an H. So I think somebody just transposed that N to an H and turned it into Home Street. So those were interesting. I think these streets through the years have been changed by the local municipality. So some of these streets have changed. You know, Academy, there was by, it's Dakota Street now, right next to the library. When they originally designed uptown, that was called Academy Street. And it changed to Dakota. You know, almost all of these have a story one way or another. Like Brynmore became Emmett. And Emmett should have one T, is that right, Frank?
Correct.
Frank's an old sign guy for the city, so a lot of this stuff we're familiar with, Frank. Yeah. Yeah, but Pennington was a good one. Pennington had a story too, but Hobson had a better story, so they changed the street. This is another good one. There's two guys named Wall and Jackman that built and set up the Grand Avenue addition down by Clark Park. Wall Street, from Clark Park up, used to be called Paosta Street, P-E-O-S-T-A. And when it crossed Texas, it was New Paosta, P-E-O-S-T-A. And naturally, they changed that and named it after one of the guys in the business, Wall. And that became Wall Street. That's a good story. Oh, if you come across this, you might think this is kind of strange. There's three signs here. One's east and west, one's in north and south. Dixon and Dixon. The reason being, if it's got a green sign on it, it's maintained by the city or the county or the municipality. If it's blue, it's maintained by a homeowners association. So you might see that in the outlying areas. A lot of places have a blue sign on them. That's because they're maintained by either a homeowners association or they're private. Okay. Okay, there's a Penny Lane and Nickel Annie and a two-bit lane. There's a Sunrise, Sunset, and Sunview. Timothy, Rye, and Clover, and Cattle Drive. There's a High Street and a Low Street. And we got a North Street. We don't have a South Street. And the longest street would probably be Farrell, Continental Drive from Farrell to the 9 Mile. And the shortest streets probably being one-block streets, Pennsylvania, James, and Jasper. There was kind of a tie there. They're only a block long. Some have one house, some have several. So anyway, what Lindsay and I did today with this fill-in kind of a thing, we kind of combined a lot of geography, photography, history, whatever else all together in kind of a big hodgepodge of all kinds of different things. And we call it Buttography. And it's kind of a little collective with our view when we do this. So what we did today, we've done with neighborhoods and head frames and the Butte Connection and some other things where we tie all this stuff together and kind of make a presentation that's definitely for Butte people, and it's stuff that sometimes you know, sometimes you know, but you really don't know why. And we just try and evoke that reasoning and thought behind why these things are the way they are and what makes Butte people the way we are what we are. So if you like that, we may continue that and do more of these.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. We kind of go off topic a lot sometimes, but it's kind of fun. And she does really good research. Oh my God, don't you like the stuff that she does? I I got the good drafty stuff that's right, but the hands-on stuff, that detailed stuff in the background is really, really important. So I think that's very good. So thank you, Lindsay, for doing that. Very good. So if you think that would be good, we're going to continue that. And thanks for coming today. Hope you get a new view of what the streets look like in Butte. And this wasn't too boring. Okay.